Kashikilanka took a large, thundering breath, and with its release stood upon solid ground. He raised the soil around the lake and created land, a large flat expanse upon which he would create new things that the world had never seen before. The fog was so far away that it couldn't be seen in the distance. There was one simple thing that weighed on his mind as he stared out into the wide, colorless expanse. He had no idea what to do first. He'd found the order in the world, but could not conceive of a new order. Had he achieved his purpose? Was this it? He stood in reflection until he felt the wind that he had tamed. He turned to see the great tree in the center. It was distant, but it was there. He slowly trotted over to the lake, the great sea that wrapped around and fed the tree. The tree stood in the center, taller. Kashikilanka gazed up and down the twisting, gnarled wood that reached ever higher into the heavens, ever wider across the sky. The tree stood alone. But why? Why was it alone? It could be something that he could make. But no matter how hard he tried, he could not make sense of the tree. He could not recreate it. Then, another little thought crept into his mind. Why was he alone? He understood himself. Could he not make another? He wasn't quite sure what made him him, but he knew what he was made of. He knew the shape. He could make another. He quickly made his way to the Lanka soil at the bottom of the lake. He reached his hands deep and pulled forth a large glob of the thick, viscous mud. He began to work it, carving it, shaping it, folding it. He stepped back to marvel at his masterpiece. It was a perfect replica of himself. He pulled it to the surface and began to pace around it. For some reason, it didn't take life. He placed a hand on it and took a deep breath. To his surprise, it took breath as well. Maybe he couldn't make another of himself. But if it did what he did, then perhaps he could use this thing to push the fog even farther away. He brought it to the edge of the world and took a deep breath. The statue took in the fog as well as he ever could. He pictured the wind and exhaled. The wind rushed around, keeping the fog from returning. He smoothed out the rough terrain he'd uncovered. As he was smoothing the soil, he noticed something. The statue didn't exhale. He turned to it, and the fog was swirling in and out of each orifice on the statue. It began to take a more nebulous shape. The fog had deformed it. Kashikilanka ran his hands along this creation of his until it was the correct shape again, and the fog had been contained. Then he realized the tree must have brought about his existence. The tree is what had disturbed the Lanka soil in the first place. He grabbed the statue with one hand and the wind with another. He rode the wind to the lakeside and walked across the water until he reached the great tree. He held the statue out, only to see that it had deformed again. He reached out to fix it, but slipped on the wet root and dropped the statue onto the tree. He stared for a moment as this became something new. It warped and twisted, but it seemed to know something. It stared up at Kashikilanka, and in an instant, it took on his shape. He stepped back as this thing stood itself up. It looked very much like him, but it was darker. He could see the fog in its eyes. He held a hand to his chest. Kashiki. The thing tilted its head and opened its mouth. Immediately, the fog shot out. Kashikilanka stepped back, and this thing closed its mouth again. It seemed concerned, scared, confused. Kashikilanka held a hand out, and it slowly opened its mouth again. Kashikilanka did not flinch, and within a few moments, this new creature had found a way to control the fog roiling inside. Kashikilanka held a hand to his chest again. Kashiki. The thing stood for a moment. Then it took a breath and responded. Koshiko. He had named himself Koshikolanka, the second eternal. Oh, okay, looks like it's on. Cool, getting better at this. Alright, so I thought I'd answer a question I've heard a lot, which is what's the difference between Kashikilanka, Koshikolanka, and the more popular names that you see today of Kashkalan and Koshkalan? Well, Kashkalan and Koshkalan were a much more informal title that came about during the second Thabar Imperium, whereas Kashikilanka and Koshkolanka are much older titles where we're actually unsure of the direct origin or the language of origin, but we do know that they are the oldest known titles for these entities. For further reading on the etymological history of the various names of the gods and eternals, and everything in between, you can take a look at Penelope Schrodinger's mythology of the Third Great Civilization.